Hello, my name is Dr. DrWedding, and this is VB04, Buttons, Text Boxes, and Code. Visual Basic is a massive language, and you're never going to know everything about it. But if you understand how it is structured, it will help you learn Visual Basic faster and help you understand code that you find in a book or on the internet. Think of Visual Basic as a massive outline similar to the small outline of World War II. In an outline like you were taught in grade school, the highest level is the Roman numerals, next are capital letters, next are the Arabic numbers, the lowercase letters, and so on. In an outline, items under other items are subsets. Under the Allies is the US, the UK, and Canada. These three countries are subsets of the Allies. Under each of these countries are leaders, generals, and tanks. But only US tanks are under A, only UK tanks are under B, and only Canadian tanks are under C. Normally, accessing an object in an outline would just be a list of the path on where the item is found. So if I was to access the Ram Mark I tank, I would say Roman numeral 1, capital C, number 3, lowercase a. This is similar to how Visual Basic, as well as many other languages, access parts of the code. The difference is that in VB you use dot notation. That means every time you step down a level in the outline, you put a period. So accessing the same Mark I tank in dot notation would be Allies, dot, Canada, dot, tank, dot, Ram. And if I wanted to change the color to green, I would use color dot green. So if you keep this outline structure in mind, it will help you throughout this video. Let's get started. At this point, I'm going to open up a new project. If you do not understand what a project is, or you don't understand how to open a project, please go back one video. So I'm going to open up Visual Studio. I'm going to create a new project using Windows Form app using the .NET framework. I'm going to give it the name VB04 and open the project. We now have a new project with a blank form in it. Let's clean up the form a little bit. Change the background color of the form using the Properties window. Change the text that's displayed at the top of the form. Next, I'm going to add some objects. In the last video, we talked about the label object. In this video, I'm going to add in a button object and a text box object. I'm going to start by adding two buttons. As you add more than one object, Microsoft will increment the name of the object. For example, button 1, button 2, button 3, and so on. I'm going to select the first button, and because it's selected, the Properties window is now going to change the properties of button 1. We discussed the text property in the last video. The text property is the text that's seen when the program is running. However, there's another property at the top of this list. That property is the name property, and unfortunately, it's usually named the same as the text property. Even though they're the same, they have very different uses. The name property is a non-visible property. This sometimes confuses new programmers because they see the name as button 1 and they also see button 1 on the actual button. The name property is used to access objects in the code. Normally, people will rename their object using the following convention. They'll have a 3-letter abbreviation of the object. In this case, a button would be BTN, followed by a capitalized word describing what the button does. This button is going to print the word hello. You'll notice that as this property has changed, the text on the button has not changed. To change the text on the button, we have to change the text property. I can also change the background color. I can do the same thing with the second button. I can select the button, go to the Properties window, rename the object, change the text that appears on the button, change the background color, and resize it. Next, I'm going to add a label. Just like with the button, label 1 is the name of this object and the text property associated with this object. Label 1 is selected, so I can go to the Properties window and change its text. And then change its name. Rename it LBL Output. Next, I'm going to add a text box. You'll notice there's a small arrow on the top of the text box. That small arrow is to give you multi-line text boxes if that is what you need. All you would need to do is select the arrow and check multi-lined. Now, the text box can be resized to hold multiple lines of text. The text box is selected, so I can go down to the Properties window and rename it. I will rename this text box TXT Output. There's no visible text showing, so the text property is blank. I do want a set of scroll bars, so I will select Scroll Bar and choose Vertical. Up to this point, what I have covered has been a review of past videos. I have been creating a form and changing the properties of the objects on that form. I have also introduced the name property that will become more important when I start to cover code. I should also note that you should never change the name of Form 1. This can prevent your program from compiling and running. I have also introduced 2 new objects, the button object and the text box object. The label object was covered in previous videos and used to write text to the form. The text box is similar to the label because it can also write text to the form, but it can also be used to read information in from the form. Think of the label as an emergency door. It allows people to exit a building. A text box is more like the main entrance of a building where people can both exit and enter. Before I start to show you the code, I need to finish this form. Due to the repetitive nature of creating a form, I will skip to the completed form. Now that we have completed the form, we can start to write code. Looking back at an image from a previous video, you can see a representation of what we have created. We currently have a project named VB04 with a single form named Form 1. On this form, we currently have 6 objects. Namely, there are 4 buttons, a text box, and a label. Our next step is to open the code section of the project. This code section is associated with Form 1. In this code section, we can generate subroutines for as many of the objects as we wish. We will be generating 4 subroutines, one subroutine for each one of the buttons on the form. To generate the code section, just double-click on any object on the form. I'm going to double-click on the Print Hello button. This opens up Public Class Form 1. This is the code section that pairs up with Form 1, and its job is to hold the subroutines used by the objects that are on Form 1. Because I double-clicked on the Print Hello button, the subroutine that runs when this button is clicked was created for us. Notice the name property of the object is now part of the subroutine name. By renaming the objects, it is easier to find a specific subroutine instead of looking through a series of subroutines named Button 1, Button 2, Button 3, and so on. The first command I'm going to cover is the comment. The comment tells the compiler to ignore the current line. Comments are used to document code and let one human explain to another human what is going on inside the code. There are 2 commands that you can use to generate a comment: the rem statement or a single quote. The rem statement is a very old command and is short for remark. The command has been carried forward as BASIC has evolved. To use this command, just type rem and then your comment. The other command to generate a comment is a single quote. I prefer this command because it's neater and it only takes up 1 space. You should always put your name, date, and a quick description of what the program is doing at the top of your code. You can also add other information you think is important, like major revisions and the last date the code was modified. At this point, I'm going to write the code that will change the text box when the Print Hello button is pressed. This will use the equal sign. When you are writing a computer program, the equal sign is not the same as the equal sign you use in a math class. In a math class, if you perform an operation on one side of an equal sign, you must do the same operation on the other side of the equal sign. In programming, this is not true. In programming, the equal sign is an assignment. It is used to move one value from one location to another. In programming, the left side of the equal sign is the destination, and the right side of the equal sign is the source. To change one of the text box properties, start with the name of the text box. Using dot notation, we can step down 1 level where we can select the text property. The equal sign will assign the source to the text box's text property. In this case, the source is the character string hello. Using this example as a guide, it should be easy for you to change some of the other objects' properties. To write the code for the next button, select the Form 1 Design tab and double-click on the Goodbye button. This will generate the subroutine for the Goodbye button. And just as before, you can write the code for this button inside of its subroutine. Again, I will go back to the design and double-click on the New Line button to generate this button's subroutine. And just as before, I will change the properties of some of the objects that are on the form. This time, I want the text on the text box to span multiple lines. To do this, I will use the VBCrLf command. That stands for the Visual Basic Carriage Return and Line Feed. This command is not between the double quotes. If it were put between the double quotes, the program would actually print the letters VBCrLf to the text box, and it would not advance the cursor to the next line. Because there is a string and a command being assigned to the text property, they must be glued together using the ampersand. Anytime you want to join a character string, a command, or variables together, you need to put an ampersand between them. Lastly, I will write the code for the Clear button. Just as before, I will go to the form and double-click the button and have the subroutine generated for me. The Clear button will clear the text box properties. To reset a variable or the properties of an object back to their default value, you're going to use the Nothing command. Nothing is a built-in command that will reset a variable back to its default or any property back to its default. Before I run this program, you should notice the gold bar on the left side of the code. This is the editor alerting you to the fact that you have not saved the code. Before you run the code, you should press the Save All icon at the top of the screen. When the code has been saved, the gold bar will turn green. To run the code, just press the Start button at the top of the screen. Here is the working code. When we click the Print Hello button, the button code will change the text property of the text box. It will also change the background color of the text box, as well as the text property of the label below the text box. When the Goodbye button is pressed, the text box and label properties are changed again. The previous blue background color and the previous Hello text are erased and replaced with the yellow background and the Goodbye text. The same is true when the New Line button is pressed. However, in this text property, the VBCrLf command was used to demonstrate how to make the text span multiple lines. The Clear button also changes the properties of the text box. However, because the Nothing command was used, their properties were reset to their default values. As a review, this video has covered dot notation, the name property, the code section, 2 ways to write a comment, the VBCrLf command, the ampersand, and the Nothing command. You should know and understand these concepts before moving on. If you find these videos useful, please like and subscribe. It is the only way I can continue to make these videos.